think one of the strangest parts about psychological weight is that most of the time, people don't even realize they're carrying it. Not at first anyway, because eventually certain kinds of tension stop feeling temporary and start feeling normal. You wake up already thinking, already bracing a little, already carrying unfinished conversations, responsibilities, worries, expectations, memories, pressure about the future, pressure about yourself. And because it happens every day, it slowly starts blending into your sense of reality. You stop noticing the weight because you've adapted to holding it. I think a lot of people live this way for years, functioning, working, providing, taking care of people, answering messages, paying bills, showing up where they need to show up. From the outside, life keeps moving, and internally, they become so used to psychological tension that they barely question it anymore. Not because they enjoy it, but because constant mental carrying starts feeling tied to responsibility. Like if you stop holding everything internally, something important might fall apart. Once you realize this, you start noticing how often the mind creates a kind of invisible labor that never fully ends. Not physical labor, mental labor, emotional labor, the constant management of yourself, managing reactions, managing uncertainty, managing how people perceive you, managing the future before it arrives, managing conversations that haven't even happened yet. And after a while, even moments that should feel neutral become heavy because the mind rarely sets anything down completely. You can feel it in small moments sometimes. Sitting on the couch but not actually resting. Driving somewhere while replaying conversations. Trying to watch a movie while mentally tracking tomorrow. Even laying in bed can feel like continued effort because the body is still while the mind keeps carrying. I don't think people always understand how exhausting that becomes over time, especially people who are dependable, people others rely on, parents, providers, caregivers, people who learned early in life that staying mentally alert felt safer than relaxing. Sometimes the mind doesn't carry tension because it wants suffering. Sometimes it carries tension because somewhere along the way, vigilance became associated with protection. If I stay prepared, maybe things won't fall apart. If I think ahead enough, maybe I can avoid pain. If I stay mentally engaged, maybe I can stay in control. And honestly, that makes sense. Life teaches people to guard themselves. Disappointment does that. Loss does that. Financial stress does that. Trauma definitely does that. Even love can do that sometimes, especially when you care deeply about people and know how much can actually be lost. So this isn't really about blaming the mind for trying to protect you. It's more about noticing how exhausting it becomes when protection turns into a constant state of internal holding. Because eventually the nervous system stops distinguishing between actual danger and continuous mental anticipation. The body just learns tension, and people adapt to carrying it so well that they often mistake the absence of tension for laziness or irresponsibility. That part took me a while to notice in myself. There were moments where I would finally sit down after a long day and immediately feel guilty for not doing something productive. Not because something urgent actually needed done, but because the mind had become so accustomed to carrying that stillness itself started feeling unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people experience that now. Moments become difficult not because life is always difficult, but because the mind has forgotten how to stop gripping experience. Even during rest, even during quiet, even during moments that are objectively okay, keeps carrying anyway. Once you begin seeing this clearly, you start noticing how often unnecessary weight gets added to ordinary life. A difficult conversation happens, and then gets replayed internally for 3 more days. A mistake happens at work, and suddenly it becomes commentary about your entire identity. Someone seems distant, and the mind immediately starts building explanations. The future arrives in fragments long before it actually gets here. And little by little, the person stops living only today. They start mentally living multiple versions of reality at once. The current moment, the feared moment, the imagined future, the replayed past. No wonder people feel overwhelmed. The human mind was never meant to carry entire psychological timelines all day long. And technology has amplified this in ways people barely talk about honestly. There's almost no space left anymore. People wake up and immediately absorb information. Notifications, news, messages, stress, opinions, expectations, comparison, and then wonder why the nervous system feels exhausted before the day even fully begins. Sometimes I think people believe peace will arrive through finally controlling everything correctly. But life rarely becomes fully controllable. Even when things improve, uncertainty remains. People still get sick. Plans still change. Relationships still evolve. Unexpected phone calls still happen. Life keeps moving in ways no amount of mental preparation fully prevents. And strangely enough, there can be something relieving about finally seeing that clearly. Not hopeless, just honest. Because once you stop expecting the mind to perfectly secure life, some of the unnecessary gripping begins loosening on its own. Not all at once, but gradually, you start realizing that carrying psychological weight constantly doesn't actually guarantee safety. It mostly guarantees exhaustion. That doesn't mean responsibility disappears. You still care, you still plan, you still prepare when needed. But there's a difference between responding to life and internally carrying life every second of the day. One is functional. The other slowly crushes people without them realizing it. And what's difficult is that heavy internal carrying often gets praised in modern culture. People admire stress. Overthinking gets mistaken for intelligence sometimes. Burnout gets treated like evidence of importance. People feel guilty for slowing down because everyone around them also looks overwhelmed. So the cycle keeps reinforcing itself. Meanwhile, simple moments keep passing by underneath all the psychological noise. Dinner with family, quiet drive home, music playing while cleaning the kitchen, a pet laying next to you, cold air outside early in the morning. Tiny moments that could actually reconnect someone to life if the mind wasn't constantly somewhere else carrying invisible weight. And maybe that's part of why some people suddenly break down emotionally during completely ordinary moments. Not because the moment itself is tragic, but because the nervous system finally gets a brief opening where all the suppressed carrying becomes visible at once. I think people are more tired emotionally than they admit. Not weak, just overloaded. There's a difference. And honestly, I don't think the answer is becoming emotionless or detached from life. I don't think the goal is to stop caring. The people who care deeply often carry the heaviest internal loads. The shift is more subtle than that. It's learning that not every thought requires prolonged engagement. Not every fear needs rehearsed repeatedly. Not every uncertain future deserves hours of internal occupation before it arrives. And maybe most importantly, not every moment of rest needs earned through exhaustion first. Once you realize this, rest starts changing a little. Not because the mind suddenly becomes silent forever, but because you stop believing every internal signal requires immediate involvement. You start allowing moments to simply be enough again. Enough conversation. Enough work for today. Enough thinking for now. Enough analysis. Enough carrying. And sometimes those moments feel strangely emotional at first, because many people haven't actually relaxed internally in years. Not fully. Their body stopped moving occasionally, but the psychological holding never did. So when the grip softens even slightly, there can almost be grief underneath it. The realization of how long you've been bracing yourself against life. How long you've been preparing for impact even during ordinary days. How long you've been carrying yourself as if existence itself required constant management. But little by little, something starts shifting. The world stops feeling quite so heavy. Not because problems disappear, but because the mind stops turning every experience into additional psychological weight. You begin meeting life more directly instead of carrying mental versions of life everywhere you go. And honestly, some days you'll still get pulled back into it. That's part of being human. Some weeks stress will return hard. Some seasons of life genuinely are heavier. This isn't about becoming permanently untouched by experience. It's more about noticing that you don't always have to add so much extra weight to moments that were already difficult enough on their own. Sometimes life is already enough without mentally multiplying it. And maybe part of healing is slowly learning the difference between necessary responsibility and unnecessary psychological carrying. One helps you live. The other quietly prevents you from fully arriving inside your own existence. If this episode connected with you, feel free to like, subscribe, and share it with someone else who may be more exhausted from invisible weight than they've been able to admit out loud.